We had just moved into a new house in Nashville, Tennessee, only a few months after our wedding. It was a new chapter in our lives, a place where we hoped to build our future, possibly a family. We were excited to enjoy our very first private space, free from any third-party interference. However, just a week after we moved in, Richard's parents, Jack and Sophie, showed up unannounced. There was no call, no warning, just their car parked right in front of the gate, as if silently declaring that this was their house. This was not an ordinary visit. I'm Emma, Richard's wife, a woman who simply wanted to enjoy her new life with her husband, but the constant intrusion from his family made me feel disrespected. Before I came into Richard's life, his parents, Jack and Sophie, were used to controlling everything about him. They chose the college he went to, Vanderbilt, of course, for the family prestige. They chose the job he took at Jack's insurance company, and even picked his hairstyle so he would look more professional. Richard never pushed back. He would laugh it off and call it parental love. I once hoped that when we got married, when he put that ring on my finger and vowed to build a home with me, they would step back and let him make his own decisions, our decisions. But I was wrong, naively, pathetically wrong. They didn't step back. They stepped in further, as if I were an intruder who needed to be taught her place. The day they showed up unannounced at our new home was only the beginning, but it revealed their true nature to me. Jack walked in with muddy boots, staining the hardwood floors I had just cleaned to a shine, holding a cheap bottle of wine, not as a housewarming gift, but as a way to mark their territory, like, we're here and we're in charge. Sophie was quieter than Jack, but the way she looked around the house, her eyes scanning every corner like she was inspecting merchandise, gave me goosebumps. Then she spoke, her voice sweet but cold. Emma, we need a spare key to this house, just in case we need to check on things. You don't mind, do you? I was standing there, still holding a glass of water, my mouth not even open yet, when Richard nodded. Sure, Mom. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the spare key from his keychain, and handed it to Sophie, without looking at me, without asking me. I felt my blood rush to my face, but I forced a smile and swallowed my anger like swallowing a block of ice. Their controlling behavior didn't stop at words or glances. Last week, when I suggested repainting the living room blue, a color I've loved since childhood, Richard agreed and even smiled. Our home will look beautiful. But that night, he called Sophie, and the next morning, Jack showed up with a bucket of gray paint, saying bluntly, "Gray fits better. Blue looks cheap." Richard didn't object, just shrugged. Dad's not wrong. I stood there staring at the paint bucket like I was staring at my own failure, feeling like my voice carried no weight in this house, the house I dreamed would be ours. They didn't just want to control Richard. They wanted to control me, the space I lived in, the dream I was building. I started to realize, to Jack and Sophie, I wasn't a daughter-in-law. I was a threat, an outsider that needed to be contained. Each passing day, their intrusion became more obvious, and I felt increasingly disrespected in my own home. My father-in-law, Jack, once opened my fridge, took out a beer without asking, and sneered, "You should buy the expensive kind." Sophie silently rearranged my bookshelf, moving my favorite novels to the bottom shelf and replacing them with Jack's business books she thought I should read. I tried to stay silent, to avoid causing conflict with Richard. He was still the man I loved, and I didn't want him caught in the crossfire between me and his family. But that moment when he handed them the key without asking me, as if I were invisible, changed everything. I felt a slow burning anger inside me, not the explosive kind, but the kind that simmers, waiting for the right moment to erupt. They thought they could control me, trample my boundaries, and I would stay quiet. They were wrong, and I would show them soon. So right after that, when Richard went to work, I acted. I called an installer and asked for a full home surveillance system, one camera in the kitchen, one in the living room, one in the hallway, tiny eyes they would never notice. I added a second lock to the front door, the kind that only opens from the inside, and activated a 24/7 security alert system on my phone. I didn't tell Richard because I needed to see them reveal themselves. Just a few days later, my first trap worked. I was at the supermarket, pushing a cart full of vegetables for dinner, when my phone gave off a sharp ping. A notification from the security system. Front door opened at 2:47 p.m. My heart pounded as I opened the camera app. Jack and Sophie had entered the house, unannounced, without a call. Through the tiny screen, I saw Jack in the kitchen, opening my fridge, grabbing a beer, and drinking it right there, mumbling something I couldn't hear. Sophie casually walked around the living room, running her hand along the curtains I had just hung, then sat on the sofa, looking around as if she were the rightful owner of the house. I zoomed in and saw Jack rummaging through the drawer under the sink, where I kept my kitchen towels, like he was looking for something. My heart turned cold, not out of fear, but from the clear confirmation. They truly believed they had the right, that this house wasn't mine, but their territory to enter at will. I stood in the Kroger aisle, clutching my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white, my breathing fast like I'd just run a mile. But I didn't abandon my cart or rush home like my instincts told me to. I stood there, surrounded by the smell of freshly baked bread from the bakery section, took a deep breath, and let the fiery anger in my chest cool into something sharper, cold and solid like steel. They had walked right into my trap, the one I'd silently set the day Richard handed them the key without asking me. I would show them I wasn't someone they could easily deal with, not the obedient daughter-in-law they thought I was. The cameras kept rolling, the tiny lenses hidden in the kitchen and living room capturing their every move, every word, undeniable evidence. I needed to confront not just Jack and Sophie, but Richard too, the man who allowed this to happen, who chose silence over protecting me. I knew that the next time they crossed that threshold, I would be more than ready. There would be an ending they'd never see coming. An ending that would reclaim not only my space, but my voice in this marriage. But right now, I needed to act. I took another breath, my hand trembling as I opened the security app, my thumb gliding to the control for the second lock, a smart feature I had asked the installer to add 2 days ago, after seeing the smug look on Sophie's face when she held the key. I hadn't told Richard, not yet, because I needed to keep control of the situation. I pressed the button, and through the camera speaker, I heard a sharp click echo through the stillness of the house. On screen, Jack spun around, still holding the bag of potato chips I had saved for the evening, crumbs scattering across the polished hardwood floor. Sophie jumped up from the couch, the pillow I'd placed on the seat falling to the ground. Her face tightened, her eyes darting toward the front door, confused. They didn't understand what was happening, but I did, and I was in control. They started to panic, just as I predicted. Jack moved quickly toward the door, his heavy boots thudding on the floor, grabbing the doorknob with such force I could hear the metal creak. But the door didn't budge. The internal lock was doing its job, turning them into mice trapped in a cage I had built. What the hell? Why is this door locked? I heard him growl through the camera mic, his voice hoarse with frustration, his face flushed red, about to explode. Sophie ran after him, her long dress sweeping across the floor, tugging at the door harder than Jack. But it was useless. The door stood firm, as solid as my will in that moment. "Jack, call Richard," she shouted, her voice shrill and echoing through the speaker, pounding on the door like it would open with enough force. Jack fumbled through his coat pocket, hands trembling, dialing in a rush, and I saw Richard's name pop up on my screen. He was calling him, but I wasn't going to let Richard interfere now. I silenced my phone, letting it vibrate pointlessly in my hand, then dialed Uncle David, the one person I knew would be Jack and Sophie's living nightmare. "Uncle, I need you here now," I said into the phone, my voice calm but urgent, each word spoken with a certainty I had never had before. "My in-laws are in my house without permission, and I just locked them in." Uncle David didn't ask questions. He was never one for small talk. His deep voice came through the line. 15 minutes, Emma. "I'm on my way." I hung up, eyes still fixed on the screen, watching Jack and Sophie bang on the door, shouting in vain, and I knew everything was going according to plan. I stood there in the middle of the supermarket aisle, still gripping my phone, my breath slowly steadying, but inside me was a slow burning fire, ready to erupt when Uncle David arrived, ready to face them all. They had walked into my trap, and I wasn't going to let them get away easily. While waiting, I watched Jack and Sophie through the camera, feeling both anger and satisfaction as I saw them lose control. Jack pounded on the door harder, shaking the wooden frame, his face bright red. "Who the hell locked this damn door?" Sophie paced the living room, holding her head muttering, "Richard will take care of this." He'll open the door. They tried calling Richard again, but he didn't answer. I knew he was in a meeting at work, and I had no intention of letting him intervene now. I wanted them to face the consequences, to feel the helplessness I had once felt when they invaded my space. With every passing minute, Jack's banging got louder, his voice more hoarse, and I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, waiting for the moment Uncle David would arrive. Uncle David showed up just as promised, exactly 15 minutes later. I drove home the moment he called. "I'm here, Emma." When I pulled into the driveway, he was already at the door, tall, short salt and pepper hair, stern eyes like steel, the bearing of someone who had lived through many storms in life, from his days as a police officer to the years raising a child alone after his wife passed. He wore an old leather jacket, hands in his pockets, but his presence made the air around the house feel heavier. I unlocked the door remotely, and as it clicked open, Jack and Sophie nearly bolted out, their faces sweaty and flustered. But they froze the moment they saw Uncle David. Jack stammered, "What are you doing here?" Sophie stepped back, clutching her chest, eyes wide with panic like she had encountered something beyond her control. Uncle David didn't smile, didn't greet them. He stepped forward, his voice low but thunderous like a command. "You have no right to be here. This is Emma and Richard's home, not yours." Jack tried to argue, his voice shaky. "We're Richard's parents. We have the right to check on things." But Uncle David cut him off, raising a hand. "Check on things? You don't pay rent. You don't own this house. I do." I stepped forward and handed him the rental agreement that Richard and I had signed with Uncle David, a deal I proposed from the start to protect this home, with Uncle David listed as the legal co-owner. "Uncle David is here with us," I said, my voice calm but icy. "And you just trespassed into my home without permission." Sophie turned pale, her mouth open, but no words came out. Jack growled, "You dare do this to us?" I looked Jack straight in the eye, not blinking, every word dropping like a stone. "This is not your house. And I am not a doll for you to unlock whenever you please." My voice was firm, unwavering. Uncle David stood beside me, silent but solid like a wall of steel. His presence wasn't just that of a protector. It was the validation behind every word I spoke. Jack and Sophie stood frozen, completely outmatched. A cold wind drifted through the doorway, but the tension in the air only thickened. Jack clenched his fists, the muscles in his arms bulging like they were about to burst, his face turning a deep purple, on the verge of exploding. Sophie, pale and shaken, turned away, mumbling something, her voice too faint to hear. I didn't need to. I already knew it was a meaningless excuse. Both of them knew they had gone too far this time. But they couldn't stop. The rage inside them wasn't something they could easily let go of. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange calm settle inside me, even as the tension still surrounded me. I could sense a shift in the air, the weakness slowly surfacing in their eyes. No more excuses could salvage the ground they'd lost. Jack stood still, glaring at me like he wanted to tear me apart, but he couldn't do anything. My gaze was stronger than ever. I wasn't afraid anymore, and I knew they were starting to feel that. Sophie turned to look at me one more time, but I didn't look away, didn't back down. I knew they wouldn't give up easily. They would be back. They would look for ways to retaliate. But this time, I was ready. I had the evidence. I had Uncle David. And most importantly, I had the strength to face them. The tension in the air hadn't lifted, but I could feel the clear shift. They were no longer in control. And I wasn't going to let them take that power back. Not ever. Next week, I would make them understand this house, this life, belongs to Richard and me, not to them. After Uncle David silenced Jack and Sophie at the doorstep, Emma, thought they would back off, leave quietly, and let us be. But I underestimated their arrogance. They wouldn't back down easily, never. Jack stood there, fists clenched, breathing heavily like a cornered animal, his face red as if about to explode. Sophie turned to me, eyes blazing, her voice high and threatening. "You think you can beat us with this little stunt, Emma? We'll wait for Richard to come home, and he'll open that door right away." Jack roared, his voice louder than the wind rustling through the trees. I stood next to Uncle David, arms crossed, watching them act out their desperate drama, no longer afraid. Only cold determination remained. They still thought Richard was their puppet, but this time, I was ready to prove that both he and I had changed. Jack pulled his phone from his coat pocket, hands shaking with rage, dialing Richard with the speaker on full volume. "Richard, come home now. Emma locked the door and won't let your parents out. She's lost her mind." I heard Richard's voice on the other end, broken between office background noise. "Dad, I'm in a meeting. What's going on?" Sophie snatched the phone from Jack's hand, nearly screaming into the mic. "You need to come home immediately. Emma brought some thug uncle to threaten us." "Who does she think she is?" I glanced at Uncle David and saw him smirk, a rare but meaningful smile, as if he were savoring their panic. I wasn't about to let them drag this performance on any longer. I stepped forward, my voice calm, but sharp as a blade. "Enough. If you don't leave, I will call the police." Jack turned to me, eyes wide, his voice hoarse. "You dare call the police on your in-laws?" I gave a cold smile. "I do. And I will. Right now." I stood there, eyes locked on Jack and Sophie, seething inside but outwardly composed. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket, fingers gliding across the screen, and dialed 911. When the dispatcher's voice came through, "911, what's your emergency?" I took a deep breath, keeping my tone clear and firm. "I have two people unlawfully in my home at 142 Maple Street, Nashville. I've asked them to leave, but they're refusing." The dispatcher responded quickly. "We're sending officers now. Please stay safe." I hung up, my eyes never leaving Jack and Sophie, waiting for their reaction. Jack went completely still. The hand holding his phone began to tremble, then, crash. The phone fell onto the stone walkway, screen shattering, tiny shards glittering under the porch light like a spider web of glass. Sophie clutched her chest, eyes wide with panic, stammering, You can't do this to us." But I didn't stop, didn't waver. I stared back, my gaze as hard as steel, letting my actions speak for themselves. The sound of sirens began to echo in the distance, faint but rising above the wind, rustling through the dry leaves lining Maple Street. With each passing second, the sirens grew closer, sharper, turning the tense atmosphere into a crescendo of confrontation. Jack turned to Sophie, his voice rasping. "She's really doing it." Sophie gripped his arm, nails digging into the fabric of his coat. "Call Richard again. He won't let this happen." But I knew, this time, no one could save them. When the patrol car pulled up at the gate, red and blue lights flashing across the yard, two officers stepped out. The first was tall, broad-shouldered, his deep voice cutting through the night. "What's going on here?" The second was smaller, but his sharp eyes scanned each of us as if reading every intention. I stepped forward and pointed at Jack and Sophie. They entered my home without permission. I have video footage from the security cameras as evidence. The taller officer turned to them, eyebrows furrowed. "Do you have anything to explain?" Jack tried to hold his ground, his voice trembling but still clinging to a smug tone. "We're her in-laws. We have a key. We have the right to be here." He raised his hand to emphasize his words, but the shaking fingers betrayed his false confidence. Sophie nodded rapidly, adding, "We were just here to check on things." I didn't let them continue. I raised my phone, tapped the screen, and opened the security footage in front of the officers. The video played clearly, Jack in the kitchen, opening the fridge, taking out a beer and chugging it, then rummaging through the drawer under the sink as if looking for something. Sophie in the living room, sitting on the couch, propping her feet on the coffee table, stroking the curtains like she was inspecting the quality. I turned to the officer, my voice ice cold but firm. "A key does not equal ownership. This is my home, and they were not invited. They have no right to be here." The tall officer watched the footage, his expression darkening, then nodded to his partner. "Understood." Tension reached its peak as the sound of Richard's car engine echoed from the end of the street. His silver Toyota stopped right in front of the gate, headlights sweeping across the yard, illuminating Jack and Sophie huddled under the stern gaze of the officers. Richard stepped out, his shirt wrinkled after a long day at the office, face pale as he took in the scene, two police officers, his frantic parents, and me standing there, unmoving like a statue. He rushed over, his voice shaking. Emma, what's going on? The smaller officer stepped forward, blocking his path, voice even but firm. Do you know these people? Richard paused, his eyes moving over Jack, who was growling, pointing a finger at me, then Sophie, crying, tears streaming down her cheeks, and finally landing on me. I stood there, gripping my phone, heart pounding, not from fear, but because this was the moment I had waited for. Who would Richard choose? Would he stand with his parents like all the times before, or would he stand with me, stand with us? Richard took a deep breath, his shoulders trembling slightly. Then he looked the officer in the eye. His voice rang out into the quiet night, clear and unwavering. They're my parents, and they're trespassing without permission from me or my wife. That sentence hit like a thunderclap, knocking Jack and Sophie off their footing. Sophie screamed, voice cracking in disbelief and pain. Richard, what are you saying? We're your family. Tears flowed down her face, hands clutching it like she'd been slapped. Jack lunged forward, trying to grab Richard by the shoulders. Are you insane? You're betraying your own parents for this girl. But Richard stepped back, avoiding Jack's hands, and turned to face me. In his eyes, I saw a newfound resolve, like he had finally broken free from the invisible wall his parents had built around him for years. He didn't say anything else to them, just looked at me, and that look said it all. He had chosen me, chosen us, for the first time in his life. The police didn't wait any longer. The tall officer stepped forward, placing a hand on Jack's shoulder. Leave now, or we'll put you in cuffs. Jack struggled, his voice raspy. I'm not going anywhere. This is my son's house. But the smaller officer had already pulled out the handcuffs, the steel glinting under the streetlight. Don't make us use these. Sophie pulled Jack's arm, her voice choked with sobs. Stop it, Jack. We've already lost. They shuffled back to their silver SUV, Jack still pointing a finger at me. You'll regret this, Emma. But his threat no longer held weight. It was just the roar of a beast that had lost. The car door slammed shut, and as the taillights disappeared around the corner, I stood there feeling like a weight had finally lifted off my chest after all these months. Richard stepped toward me, placing his hand over mine. I'm sorry, Emma. I didn't know they'd go this far. I looked at him and nodded, but deep inside I knew this battle wasn't truly over, and I would need to be even stronger to protect what was mine. That very day, Richard and I changed every lock, brand new, shiny ones, keys only the two of us had. We temporarily blocked Jack and Sophie's numbers, removed them from Facebook, Instagram, everything. They tried calling a few times, leaving threatening messages. You think you're safe, Emma? But I listened to Sophie's voice, shrill with rage, then deleted them without hesitation. Richard sat beside me on the couch, holding my hand tighter than ever. For the first time in my life, I feel free from them. I don't want to live under their shadow anymore. I nodded, a sense of relief washing over me like a cool breeze across the porch. But I knew Jack and Sophie weren't the type to let go so easily. The bitterness in their eyes when they left was a promise of another fight. Still, I wasn't afraid anymore. I had Richard, I had Uncle David, I had evidence, and most importantly, I had my voice. This house was now ours, truly ours, and I would protect it no matter what they tried. Next week, I'd be installing a fence, a declaration that my boundaries are not to be crossed.